welcome to the International Investment Leadership Summit 2021. We're here in our studios in Covent Garden in London, and we've been joined today by 6 of the preeminent voices in the industry. So we have David Kneeshaw. David, welcome. David's from Ariel 360 and IFGL. Thank you for coming across today.
Thank you, Gary.
We have Graham Sheward, who is the CEO at Hansard. Graham, welcome.
Thanks, Gary.
We also have Ariel Amigo, who's actually crossed the pond to be with us today. So thanks for coming over. Ari, you come all the way from Miami.
Yes, indeed, and thank you for having me. A pleasure to be here with you guys.
Which is a real treat. And we also have our guys on the virtual video wall from left to right. We have Nigel Green, CEO and founder of DeVere Group.
Good afternoon to you, and good to be with you.
Where are you in the world today, Nigel? It could be anywhere, couldn't it?
It could be anywhere. I'm in Malta today. I'm very pleased to be joining you via Zoom, so very good.
Fantastic. We also have Sean Christian from Canada Life. Sean,
Hi, Gary.
Thank you for joining us. Where are you today?
Yes, I'm based in a very cloudy and foggy Isle of Man as we speak.
Well, welcome today. It's great to have you up there on the screen. And we also have Robert Parker from Holborn Assets. So I'm going to fire off a series of questions. This is kind of I'd like to call it a chat rather than a debate, but it's a summit. I'll try not to do too much of the talking because people want to hear your views. We've given this the tag of a leadership summit, so some of the questions are about leadership, but because we've got so many big names in the room today, we want to talk about the industry as well. So I'll start with the first question, and I'll go to David first. How important has strong leadership been during the pandemic, and how did your role change as a result of COVID?
I think leadership mattered, if this is possible, even more than ever in the beginning, particularly of COVID. But I'm not sure my role changed particularly. I think what happened was different skills and sometimes different people came to the fore in the company. Our operations director, Denzel Williams, supported by fantastic people in IT services, the buildings manager, HR, to get the whole company changing its business model in 2 weeks was a fantastic effort. But I don't think it was me that made that happen. I think it's the fact that I trusted others to come to the fore and get on with it. I think what happened was that people made quick decisions, acted on them well, and I'm sure that's the case in lots of companies. I'm not saying we were anything very sort of different. But I think leadership mattered hugely, but not necessarily mine.
Thank you very much. I'll ask the same question to you, Graham. Now, it's interesting because you've been in the role at Hansard for coming up 6 months now, I think it is. Mm-hmm. So you were somewhere else. But you know how did you find COVID affected how you've done business?
Yeah. Well, I think COVID was a known unknown, wasn't it? I mean, we would all have prepared for it, but nobody actually expected it. Similar to David, I mean, the most important thing was, the reaction of Hansard to change its business model, to support its advisor partners and its clients in that changing environment. And we did that, by leveraging technology to provide digital solutions, such as application forms, electronic signatures, and that sort of enabled us to keep the business going and to keep new business coming in while looking after our clients with the existing portal that we use to stay connected to them. So it was like operational excellence also came to the fore to ensure that all of our colleagues could work from home safely and seamlessly in supporting the business. And then finally, I think sort of leadership through communications was key, much more so than usual. The need to speak to people daily, either by telephone or video calling, became essential to keep collaboration going and to stay in touch.
Fantastic, thanks, Graham. Ari, we were talking earlier. You've managed to fly somewhere, which is a real change. It's been a big part of everybody's role over the years. So I presume that's changed. But on the technology front, via Investors Trust, how has how important has that been for you to keep in touch with your team during this time?
Well, of course, if leadership was always important, it became key with this massive crisis, because mostly you were dealing with fear. You have fear in your employees, in your team members. You have fear in the clients, in the distribution, on what's going to happen. We were all expecting a pandemic eventually to happen. We've been talking about it for decades, but now the moment was right now, and there was a lot of fear in many people. So of course we rely a lot on technology, like our competitors. We felt that, and we feel now that we were ready for it. For example, Microsoft Teams is something that we implemented in the company way before COVID-19, so we were already using it. So we were very familiar with those tools already. But all those business continuity plans that you work year after year and you just review, everything is in place, well, they became real. And the teams in the company and technology, operations, they were all ready to react. And technology was key. Just imagine a pandemic like this 20, 30 years ago. It would be a completely different story.
Fantastic. We'll move on to Nigel Green. Nigel, you're the first head of an advisory firm that we're speaking to. The advice side of things has very much been face to face over the years. How have you guys managed? But also, how has your role changed as a result of COVID?
I think it changed massively as it did with everybody in every company. I think the first thing that happened, the markets also crashed. So we were in a situation where we needed to talk to clients quickly and effectively. And they welcomed a call, whether it was Teams or Zoom or some other video connection. And I think that just being very, very, very quickly willing to talk to clients and explain the situation so people understood clearly what was happening. And the team needed to be resilient, and we're lucky as a company. We've got resilient leaders, we've got adaptable people within the company, and you rely on those people. They're always key individuals, and everything was enhanced, if that makes sense. In other words, all of a sudden there was a situation that everybody needed to deal with, and as resilient people, they responded to it, and clients were very, very happy that we'd spoken to them. And of course, that meant that as the markets recovered, we were also in a very, very good situation to have clear communication with our clients and to be able to look after them. My role changed, less flights, but more Zoom, more Teams, and more communication in a different manner. So I think, everybody's role changed to a large extent in every business, but certainly mine did. And that was fascinating as well in some ways to see how people responded, and sometimes challenging and for them as individuals. And you saw different people that were used to face sometimes react well to Teams and Zoom, and some people struggled with it at first and you had to help them, whereas others, they found it easier, actually found it easier talking on Zoom than they did face to face. So it was interesting, challenging. We had to be adaptable. We are adaptable. The world is still in lockdown in many parts of the world. So we have offices in New Zealand, for example, which have lockdown right now. So then it became a situation, you're dealing with different countries, different situations, and that's still where we are now.
Thanks very much, Nigel. I'll go over to Sean now. And what I wanted to say, Sean, is when I've been to your office, I always feel that you're a presence there. You work the room. You speak to the staff. You're very hands-on. How challenging was it, when COVID kicked in for you to be able to do that and communicate with your team? And how's your role changed since COVID kicked in?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Probably to answer that, I would say that I think the core principles of leadership probably remained unchanged. But I think what was fascinating for me was how we had to call on different aspects of leadership as we went through the different phases of the pandemic. And whilst I'm responsible for people in different locations, we did have the luxury, of course, in the Isle of Man operation that I think it was towards the end of June, early July 2020 that we returned almost to normality and we allowed people to return to the office. But throughout that period where we were in lockdown, I think initially, in terms of leadership, I think people were expecting quick and decisive decisions to be made. and a few of the other panelists have talked similar. I think if anybody would have asked any of our businesses that, to mobilise 100% of the workforce in the space for a week or two and issue laptops to hundreds of people, thousands of people in some cases, then I think we would have been laughed at. But of course, we all, all companies delivered that particularly well. I think then as we got into the core of the pandemic, I think it switched then in terms of leaders providing reassurance. It was clear that our people wanted reassurance that, we were going to eventually emerge out of this. We were going to be okay. We were okay as a business. And we invested very heavily in support mechanisms for our people. We ran various workshops. We gave access to various helplines in order to support them through what was quite an unusual time for people to be working from home and not mixing with their colleagues. What we also made use of very heavily was pulse surveys, just to remain in touch with our people and to understand how people were feeling. And we still run those now, and they're run on a quarterly basis. I think then as lockdown eased, and as I say, for the Isle of Man, that was quite early on back in the middle of last year. Really then our leadership skills turned into, well, how do we return to the office? And I think, just touching on the question you asked me, how has that impacted how we lead in the business? I think there's probably, the main aspect is probably communication. And what we found was that some of the things that came to us very naturally when we were in an office environment, in a hybrid way of working, which is the way we've adopted permanently at Canada Life, that takes a little bit of thinking about. You can't just do a town hall at the spur of the moment to a floor or to a building, because half the people might have chosen that day to work from home. So that takes some thinking about. It obviously involves technology. And then I say the other aspect would probably be how you motivate the workforce, how you do morale boosters. Again, that would normally be spontaneous, but that takes a little bit of thinking about now. And you have to be very careful, of course, that you're not focusing on just one part of the organisation, i.e. those that are in the office or indeed those that are working from home. So I think it has definitely changed the way we operate going forward, and it calls on different leadership skills.
No, absolutely. And I think the fact that as businesses, we all operate in the international spectrum with offices all around the world. So these challenges, these challenges are there. We'll just move over to Robert Parker now. Same question to you, Robert.
My role didn't change at all. We've got a strategic plan and we follow it, come hail, rain, shine, or indeed COVID. The word you said, strong, suggests to me a whip in your hand and a loud hailer in the other. All we've changed was our method of communicating in the company, and in fact we've adopted a much better communication system throughout, using of course Zoom. For me, the acid test for leadership style is seen in our high retention rate. Our main advisors don't need to, or in fact don't want to leave Holborn, because when people join, they know what we stand for, and we don't let them down.
Thanks, Bob. That was great. So this question is: what are the biggest challenges that the industry faces in 2021 into 2022 and beyond? And we'll go around the room again the same pattern. So we'll come to David first. But looking at this question, David, the biggest challenge is, how long's a piece of string? But what do you see as really the biggest challenges for this industry?
Well, you're right, Gary. We are an international business, as is everyone else on this panel. So therefore, you have a lot of moving parts: multicultural, multi-jurisdiction, multi-governance, different styles of advisors that we work with, etc., different customer needs. So if you're planning for ahead into 2022, the best thing a CEO can hope for is some sort of market stability. An efficient market that allows you to plan has strong and healthy manufacturers, good distributors or advisors who are also strong and healthy, and a good customer base that's growing and interested in what you have to offer. And when you get some sort of parity or equality between those three corners of the triangle, then you have a market that works well. And I think when everything is so unstable, whether it be through regulation in different parts of the world or pandemics, it makes it more difficult to plan for how you want to play your part in that sector. But I'm reasonably confident that there are good advisors out there are good customers, enough customers out there, and good product providers. So actually, despite the problems of the COVID and the pandemic, and some issues caused by regulation as advisors adapt, particularly in the Middle East, I think there's a healthy market and one to be excited about.
That's a really good answer and a good summary. Graham, looking at the challenges, you're 6 months into the job at Hansard. How, I'm going to ask you this separately as well, but you're 6 months into the job. What have you found that you believe the challenges for the industry and also for Hansard are across the next 12 months?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, I'm having to learn really, really quickly, given the challenging environment that we're in. You have to start with the C word, don't you? So, we're still experiencing the lag, caused by COVID-19, pandemic restrictions. I have to thank our advisors around the world that performed magnificently against that sort of challenging backdrop, and kept new business coming in. And of course, we rely on that, completely at the moment. So, that was a really sterling effort. So will there, we're in the sort of COVID, near post-COVID hangover stage. And I'm just reflecting on whether it might, our flight to technology and to leverage, digital solutions during the pandemic, our end clients would probably have been doing the same thing. So, I wonder whether it's actually influenced maybe a change in behaviours where clients might now look to online advice, rather than actually face-to-face. And, that would clearly be an issue because I don't think there's any substitute, for face-to-face advice, for clients that are looking to make long-term, decisions to invest in financial products. So I think that's probably just one to watch. Then we've got the headwind of regulation. Now, regulation is, the direction of travel is clear. And like it or not, of course, we will all, comply with that. But it brings with it an overhead. Operating costs are increasing and that needs to be addressed. And that has consequences. And I think those are manifesting themselves in the fact that we see product providers and advisors retrenching from some regions. And it's also driving consolidation in our sector to achieve economies of scale. So that may mean that there are less products or providers or advisors in the future.
Thank you very much for that. And I think it's you mentioned the rise of technology and the robo advisor. That certainly is a challenge. And I'll go over to you, Ari, from the investors' trust point of view. What are the biggest challenges for this next 12 months?
I will agree with my colleagues here. Regulation is. We see it as the biggest challenge, especially in the next couple of years, when many jurisdictions at the same time are changing the regs. Luckily, they're all going in the same direction, so of course you have some economy of scales dealing with multiple jurisdictions doing that at the same time. But as Graham was saying, of course, it drives cost up. You need to comply. You need to have bigger teams taking a look at everything that is changing. And I don't think, or we don't think, that that's going to change in the next, I would say, 2-3 years. So that period of time is going to be heavily on regulations in multiple places, and the burden is going to be put on our companies.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ari. Mm-hmm. Moving over to Nigel Green on the video wall now. You've heard what the guys have had to say, Nigel, and it's I imagine that a lot of the answers are similar, but from your point of view as an organisation that has really embraced technology as a host of apps, and you've been across this for some time, haven't you? Tell us what you think of the challenges for the industry this year.
I mean, I think there's going to be massive disruption to the industry over the next 5 years. I don't think the industry will be anything like it is today in 5 years' time. So I believe that the industry really will be digitalised, and even asset classes will continue to be digitalised. So I think there's just a complete change. I do believe in advice plus tech. So I'm very strong on that. I think that you need great technology. I feel that we can reduce client costs by using tech effectively, and I believe that our communication can be even improved, even where it is today, which is good with technology. So I think it's going to be a completely different industry in 5 years' time. I think it's going to be very challenging for everybody to adapt, banks as well. And maybe there's an opportunity there to just gain some of their space as well.
Thanks, Nigel. Looking at the same thing for Sean. Now, your audience is the UK, so you've got a different take on this. What's the biggest challenge for our industry and the cross-border financial services industry?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Yeah, I'd probably say for the UK, I mean, we would always probably have potential tax changes on our agenda of potential challenges that could come our way. Having said that, I think, it's quite clear in the UK, I think the overall tax burden is going to increase for UK residents. And, what tax changes, we don't quite yet know. But I think generally speaking, for our types of products, tax increases is probably quite good news. It increases the need for advice, and especially around tax and estate planning. Inflation seems to be with us quite clearly. So I think there's inflationary pressure on costs for us all. And of course, that comes at a time when there's downward pressure on margins, or continued downward pressure on margins in the market. We've touched on regulatory change. We embrace regulatory change because on the whole, in the UK especially, it's done for the right reasons. It's done to improve customer outcomes. The challenge, of course, is an internal challenge in that it takes resources away from activity that we would want to focus on in order to grow the business. And I think the final thing I would say in terms of challenges is that I think the pandemic is, I think Graham touched on this, the pandemic has fueled the customer expectation and the advisor expectation for product providers to accelerate their digital offering. And in some ways, that's something we've all got to get on with, because that will address, the cost pressures that will come our way if indeed inflation takes off.
Thanks very much, Sean. And finally, over to Robert Parker. Robert, what do you see as the biggest challenges for the rest of this year and into next year?
I guess the adoption of new regulation, which in turn will hit margins, and the continued upgrading and implementation of the latest fintech to create a first-class client experience. We have, over the past 3 years, created a digital-first program which will put Holborn at the cutting edge of client and advisor experience. I guess that pretty much is where we're at.
Thanks, Bob. We've kept on this question for quite a bit of time. I just want to come back to you, David, on a personal observation, and one that we may want to discuss with the group. Is consolidation in the industry probably one of the biggest challenges that we have? The advisor groups that are out there, they do need choice. And what's your take on that? Having gone through the process with FPIL being taken, merged into IFGL. What's your views on consolidation?
Consolidation works if it creates stronger, better manufacturing companies. Obviously, I'm biased. I have a view that it does, or it does in the way we do it with RL360 and FPIL. But that also applies to advisors. There's no doubt in my mind over time that there will be slightly fewer advisor firms, not necessarily fewer advisors, and they will tend to be bigger and stronger, better capitalised, more back office governance, etc., for whatever you think about that. So I think the key is that as long as there's some sort of market dynamic where there's enough providers to give the advisor choice, and I certainly think there is at the moment, that's as far as we can tell anyway, and then likewise, customers need to know there's choice in advisors. So I think consolidation is a good thing as long as it's done for the right reasons. I would say it's made us as a group stronger, bigger, it's more efficient. We can defray our costs over more policyholders. We can spend the money in more technology, and that becomes more justified when we're bigger. So consolidation for its own sake is meaningless. It works if it creates better and stronger groups. And I would obviously claim that's done that for IFG.
That's great. Let's look at leadership style. and is it a one-size-fits-all thing, or do you adapt depending on who you're managing? And I'll mix it up a little bit here. I'll go to the video wall first. There's a quote that I remember from Nigel Green. So we'll go to Nigel on the video wall. That you, and I might get it wrong, Nigel, so forgive me, but it was something about if you leave DeVere, sometimes I'd rather it was via the window rather than the door, which always stayed with me for some reason. I left via the door that day, by the way. What's your leadership style? Is it one size fits all, or how do you adapt to other people?
You have to adapt to everybody that you're managing, and you have to give it passion, which is, you're giving that quote to me, and I'm passionate about the people that I work with and developing those people. So you give everything that you've got to each individual to try and help them. And obviously, if they don't stay with us, we're disappointed. So I guess I was just expressing that. But certainly you adapt to each individual, and you need to be passionate. You want to care, and you want to try and help those people and give them everything you can. So I think that's really where that quote comes from, and shows my passion.
I'll just stay with you for a second, Nigel. It does seem that when we speak to advisor firms and the ones that are cropping up, they all seem to have gone through the DeVere training or through the DeVere door at some point. How frustrating is that, and how difficult is retention of staff these days?
Retention has been very, very good for us during the last few years in particular. So it's frustrating if they're attracted to somebody else, then maybe the grass is not greener when they get there. That can be frustrating. But nevertheless, I see it as part of what we do as a company, is developing people. So we're very proud of the fact that we take on people, we train, get them through their exams, get them qualified. So some of them decide to move on. Doesn't always work out, but nevertheless, we do. That's part of the culture. That's what we do. We develop people, we train them, and some move on, but the vast majority stay and succeed, which we're very proud of.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and thanks for being a good sport there with the additional question. I'll move over to you, Ari. We're talking about leadership style here. How would you describe your leadership style?
Well, definitely, I do not micromanage, and I totally adapt to the person you're dealing with. But basically following what Nigel was saying. You are dealing with different individuals, different backgrounds. Sometimes it's senior management. They need certain things from you. Sometimes it's junior management, where it needs more coaching and it's more developing, let's say. So you have to adapt. Your job at the end of the day is to put that person in a place to succeed. So very open door style, no micromanagement on my end. And I encourage positive criticism all the time. I like managers to cross each other, always responsible way, seriously, but always with a positive spin. I think it makes us all better. That's the way I would do it. I will describe my management style.
I need to work on that one. Positive criticism. That's a new one for me. It's some people just can't handle criticism, and they go into themselves. Do you never find that?
Well, yeah, of course. One of the first conversations that I have with any recruit or anyone that is being put in a management position is, this is the environment, this is the culture. So you have to buy into that culture. At the end of the day, you need to create that culture, and it has to be joy. It has to be something that everyone enjoys. At the end of the day, they need to wake up in the morning and be happy to go to the office. So that's what it's all about, is creating that, and just make sure that everyone understands that nothing is against you personally. It's just criticism to get better.
That's a really interesting point. David, how do you find it? You've got teams across the world. You have a leadership style. I should ask staff this question maybe. How's David's leadership style? How would you describe it? And is it this one size fits all, or do you work differently with different people?
I think my leadership style, if I had to draw one element, I don't think there's one word, but I think I'm quite clear that our company is a business. And so therefore, I think my key attribute is I would like us to be business-like in all our doings, whether it's with customers, staff, or advisors or regulators. But it is business-like. In fact, it's our first value in the group values, is be business-like. And I think I would be very proud if I was always business-like. It doesn't mean you can't be friendly, it doesn't mean you can't get on with people and have a laugh, but at the core, we're a business, and that's about growth and looking after our stakeholders, which includes shareholders. Whether I adapt my leadership style, I'll take a slightly different view to the other panelists. Not really. Of course, one adapts to individuals and the type of conversations you have and the context of that conversation. But I think leadership only works if it's an expression or an extension of your own personality. You can't fake it. So at its core, I think I don't adapt that much. But obviously there's a bit around the edges where you tailor it to the individual and conversation. But at its core, not that much. I don't think I do adapt a lot.
That's really interesting. Graham, what's your take on it? And you, again, I'll allude to the fact that you've been working with a new firm. Have you had to adapt the way you worked at your previous places, and I know you worked in Africa, and you've obviously worked in the Isle of Man for a lot of years as well. How's your leadership style? How would you describe it?
Well, I think you have to respect the culture of the company that you join. And I think that's the starting point. And then you really need to measure that culture and explore whether it's going to really help you achieve your strategy, your corporate objectives. At Hansard, I've actually just been through a culture program working with professional advisors and partners to see, whether that's correct or whether we want to change our culture. And we're actually looking to see whether we could evolve into more of a learning culture going forward, seeing the amount of innovation that's going to be, I think, coming into our sector. In terms of my own style, I think every line manager is a role model, whether they know it or not. So I like to lead from the front, set an example, by displaying the right behaviours with clear messages, designed to create a sense of business ownership. And really, my sort of leadership style is consistent, because I think that helps to inspire confidence whilst recognising that everybody's different.
It's thanks very much for that. It's interesting. One thing, we had a chat recently, and you did say something about CEOs, that they should be changed every sort of 3 to 5 years. It's good to move people along. I'll sort of throw that out there when I go over to Sean. When you said that, what did you mean by that, though? Just very, very quickly, what did you mean by that?
I just think that there's a risk, particularly in companies with relatively low turnover, of becoming quite insular, and so it always helps to get a fresh pair of eyes, new blood, new thinking, from perhaps from a different age group, demographic, diversity, I suppose, is what I'm saying there. So to do that, you've got to have a change. You've got to have a turnover of staff. It's not always a bad thing that you have that. In fact, low turnover, can be a bad thing. So it's really, you're looking for a mix. And I think where CEOs are concerned, after my career, which is just entering its 40th year, I think that, every sort of 5 to 7 years is probably the right time to get a new CEO, and maybe change some members of the top team to get a new perspective for the company, potentially a new strategy, keep things fresh.
Sean, have you got any views on that? And then obviously give us the answer to the question, which is, how would you describe your leadership style? But given what Graham's just said around changing, top level management every 5 to 7 years, what's your view on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think some people probably recognise or believe that I've been running the Isle of Man operation for probably something like 16 years. But in reality, I'm fortunate enough to be working for a very large group, and over the years, my responsibilities have moved, not necessarily away from the Isle of Man operation, but have moved into different parts of the group. And as we are today, I'm running the wealth management division for Canada Life UK, which does incorporate the Isle of Man. So although I would say my home is in the Isle of Man, Prior to the pandemic, I would probably say I was spending more time in the UK than I was at home. So the reality is that actually there are other people that are running the local operations, whether it be in the Isle of Man or in Dublin, which is the makeup of our international part of the wealth management division. And indeed, we're about to go through some change. The MD that runs the Isle of Man today is about to retire at the end of the year. And in fact, the person that's running our Dublin operation is moving into a broader group role. So I think, I'd agree with what Graham's saying. And I think actually we're achieving that within the same group, but actually it's people moving on to different group opportunities as opposed to leaving the organisation, which I think is a great thing.
I'll quickly come back to you, David, on this one, because your title's changed recently, but it kind of feels very much business as usual. How's that gone for you, and do you agree with any of the other panelists regarding, or do you agree with Graham regarding the change at the top every 5 to 7 years?
I don't think you can be too black and white or simplistic about it. I think it depends on the company, depends on the people, the management team, the circumstances. I know that we have external investors, and one of the things they like is that we have a stable management team. So I think if the company is reinventing itself through whatever mechanism, whether it chooses to change its CEO or just because the management team do it in other ways, I don't think it matters. I don't think there's one rule for this stuff. The key is, has the company reinvented itself? Has it succeeded? Has it grown? Is it better than it was several years ago? When I took over IFG, or Scottish Life International, I had 1 billion under management. We're now 19 billion plus. Would that have been the same if we changed the CEO every 5 years? Who knows?
Interesting. Same question to Robert Parker. Robert, what would you describe your leadership style as?
Well, I lean more towards the servant leader, the sort of reverse pyramid. In a typical corporate or military structure, we see the CEO or the Air Chief Marshal at the top of the pile and sort of leading from a position that tends to dictate decisions. In our business, the CEO is not at the top like some Athenian god, sending thunderbolts down from Mount Olympus. We've got a symbiotic relationship with our advisors where they're not just advisors, but they're business people in their own right. And as their business grows, so does ours. So it's got to be much more important to have a collaborative style that ensures we understand the issues together and the action that we take. No matter how difficult that action is, and it's accepted by all people. I've always adopted an open door policy and a democratic leadership style. In fact, I believe we're well known for it.
Thanks, Robert. That was great. A really interesting subject. Everybody's got a sort of different take on this, and you're judged by your successes. You're judged by the figures at the end of the day. Just leads us on to, we talked about the challenges of the industry earlier on, and I think some of us kind of crossed over into the fact that it's hard when you look at the industry not to think of your own business. But if we can sort of in a nutshell just tell us what's the single biggest challenge to your business going forward. I'm going to come to you first, Ari, if that's okay.
No problem.
Just give us a nutshell of what's the single biggest challenge.
Right now, I would say to manage growth. We've been growing dramatically over the last 10 years or so, but somehow organically. But over the last 2 years after COVID, our growth became explosive. And of course, as everyone would agree, you need to adapt the different areas of your company to be in touch with that growth, to be able to manage that growth. So it's not only from the sales side, where you have your people in place, but also operationally, you need to keep up with that demand. So I would definitely say that's the biggest challenge going forward for us.
I'm going to move up. Thanks very much for that, Ari. I'm going to move quickly over to the video wall and come back to Sean. What's the single? I mean, it's hard to determine a single challenge, but if you had to sum it up, because I'm asking you to right now. What's the single biggest challenge that your company faces in the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think I'm very clear on what the challenge is. I think it's an execution challenge. We've got we're halfway through probably the biggest transformation program that Cannes Life UK has embarked on. And, the strategy that we're implementing has 4 pillars. It's protect and grow the core markets that we're in. It's to reduce our unit costs, and we have an extensive operational efficiency program underway, which again, we're about 2 years into. We're modernising our IT infrastructure, so we're going to see all our product lines migrate across to the GBST platform. And then the 4th pillar of our strategy is something which I'm responsible for, which is to build and grow a new wealth management business and change the profile of earnings of our UK business going forward. So I think it's execution risk, really, or that's the challenge that we face as a business. And it's my responsibility and the wider leadership team, the wider UK executive team, to ensure we have the right capabilities, the right skill sets, and that in place. But actually turn it into a positive. I think, there are real opportunities for our people to get involved in, real core strands that are going to take the business forward. And I think what the pandemic has given us is, we look at the business now and we're location agnostic. So it means that we can involve people, we can recruit people from all different locations, and we're not focused on particular locations and trying to run the business in pockets. And that's opening up tremendous opportunity for our people. Thanks very much, Sean. Again, we're running out of time here, Greg, but I'll come over to you. Now, I asked you before, we talked about the fact that you're new into the role, but you've had time to look at the key challenges. If you had to sum up, what's the key challenge for Hansard in the next 12 months?
Thanks, Gary. Well, I've noticed that the challenges are in 2 or more of the questions that we've looked at today. So a bit of a cliche, but just to turn that onto its head, because challenges can also be opportunities. So our strategy really revolves around diversification of product, of distribution channel, and of markets. And to achieve that, most important thing for me at the moment is to deliver the 2 projects that are already in flight. That's launching our new platform product in Japan, which we hope to do shortly, subject to pandemic restrictions lifting in that country, and then to complete the complete overhaul of all of our IT. That will allow us then to be more flexible in creating bespoke products, getting to market far more quickly in future, and then continuing to innovate and look at insurtech opportunities for the future.
Fantastic. David, over to you. The single biggest challenge. I mean, I'm not going to put it into your mouth, but the challenge around about systems and operations, especially when you've had a big merger style deal. But apart from that, what's the biggest challenge that you're facing?
Well, I'm sorry I have to discount the apart from that, because it's a voluntary challenge rather than one forced on us. But we're quite happy, I think, with the whole distribution relationship side of the business. We're happy with our internal structures. So the biggest opportunity challenge for us is an IT transformation, partly brought along by the purchase of Friends Provident and partly voluntary things we want to do. And we've earmarked between 30 and 40 million pounds to completely transform our back office over the next 2 to 4 or 5 years. And we're already spending that money quite quickly. If we get that right, then I think that will transform the business, not just for our benefit, but also for advisors and customers. So whether you call it a challenge or not, it's definitely the biggest task that the company has chosen to take on to make itself better in the future.
Going back to the video wall, Nigel, you're somebody that definitely loves a challenge, and the tricky one here's the challenge. What's the single biggest challenge for DeVere? Try and sum it up in one thing.
It's transformation. I mean, I believe the industry is changing very, very quickly. It's implementation of new products, new ideas, new technology, and then it's making sure that everybody is on board and understands it, clients realise the benefit of it. So it's implementation of new ideas.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nigel. And the final panelist, same question to Bob. Biggest challenge, Bob?
That's a good question. Reduced commissions and moving to fee-based will have a direct impact on many advisors who find change difficult, and in turn it's going to affect margins. But we believe that in time this will be countered by increased production per advisor through better technology and training.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Bob. Appreciate that. We're coming to our final question now, and this is kind of a little bit of fun, and then we'll kind of continue for a few minutes after that. Who inspires or impresses you as a leader from anywhere? It could be industry, it could be anywhere. I'm going to go to you, David, because I'm looking directly at you when I say that. Who impresses you the most?
The person I worked for, and I was a very junior sprog in the empire, that most impressed me was Rupert Murdoch. I met him many times, and he was always rational, clear-sighted, objective, passionate, but not in a shouty way, passionate about conviction, about what he wanted. And he inspired huge loyalty from his lieutenants and clear sense of unified direction amongst those lieutenants. I have certainly never worked for anyone or been in a room with anyone where I really felt that aura and coming through in a meeting. More close to home, the person who brought me into the industry was Chris Ide, Chief Executive of Swiss Life, who sadly died quite young. I think he helped me understand what working in the industry was really about bringing people with you. And from a closer to home or personal perspective, some people who remember Swiss Life in the UK will remember Chris Ide with great fondness.
Thanks very much, David, for that. We'll move around the table. Graham, leaders of the world, leadership style, who's inspired you the most?
I found this the most difficult question, actually, because I haven't really thought about it. There's no one leader I slavishly follow or really identify with. And I'm going to stay away from politics here as well. So, I do identify with the behaviours and the values of leaders and companies, probably more. And I suspect that everybody I've worked with has had some influence on my leadership style, over the years. And I've always tried to take away, the positive attributes from the people I've worked with.
Fantastic. I'll move over to the video wall, and I'm looking directly at Bob. Bob, you've had an interesting life in the industry. Tell us about any figures out there that have inspired you as a leader.
Well, it's not just one person, but it's really a type of leadership. But if you were asking me who it was going to be, top of my list would be Mahatma Gandhi. A transformational leader in every sense. He empowered people to act rather than dictated. He was highly motivational, and he was a charismatic and a true servant leader.
Thank you, Bob. That was really nice. We'll stay on the video wall. Moving over to Sean Christian. Sean, leadership style. Who's inspired you?
Yeah, probably Gary. I'm at risk of probably sounding a bit predictable being a Manchester United fan, but I'd probably say Sir Alex Ferguson. And the reason I say that is I think, if a leader is judged on how well they maximise the performance of a team, then I think you're hard pressed to find somebody better than that, in my opinion. And to take that further, if you look at the success that Ferguson had, it's probably fair to say that they weren't teams that were made up of worldwide superstars. He was nurturing from the academy. He was passionate about bringing people through his organisation, and that applies equally to our types of businesses. But also the people skills that he had. And when you read up on Ferguson, one thing that he's famed for is that he knew everybody in that organisation. And then down in the academy, he didn't just know the names of the individuals that were in the academy, but he made certain that he knew the parents' names. And I think those type of qualities, bringing those into the business environment, I think they're great values to have. And I could go on further, but probably just to give a bit more balance, I'd probably say that Jurgen Klopp is probably, kills me to say it, but he's probably the modern day equivalent, I think, of a Ferguson, in that you can see he has the utmost trust with his players. They have respect for him. He's passionate on the sidelines. And I think he has a lot of fun, which I think is very, very important for leaders to demonstrate and to instill in a business.
Thank you, Sean. As a fellow Man United fan, I would completely disagree with you on Klopp, although he's a decent manager. We won't get too into football. I'm going to move straight over to Nigel, because we're both laughing. I've been to Chelsea with Nigel's son. Passionate Chelsea fan. We have good banter about football these days. But Nigel, if you had to sum up one person that's inspired you as a leader, who would that be?
And that was an awesome answer from Sean. And you'd look at Elon Musk, wouldn't you? You look at Christian Horner in Formula One, holding it all together. But you'd actually end up with Alex Ferguson. So I'm not a Manchester United fan. I'm definitely not a Liverpool fan either. But you'd have to say that he developed young people. He believed in young people. That's incredible. He knew everybody in the club, as Sean said. Work ethic. He was a winner. 13 Premiership titles. He evolved as well. So we talked earlier on about, does a leader have a limited amount of time? Well, he actually changed, and football changed, but he evolved. And yeah, I think he's the one that you'd have to look at as a leader and say he had or has all those qualities, because he still influenced Ronaldo going to Manchester United. I mean, that's kind of crazy that he's there and he's supposedly retired, but he's just brought perhaps the best player in the world, or persuaded him to join Manchester United, even in retirement. Okay, you'd have to say he's the number one leader and someone that all of us would aspire to be.
Thank you, Nigel. And finally, over to you, Ari. Leaders. Anyone stand out?
Yeah, let's just follow with sports. I would like to bring Greg Popovich, the head coach of the San Antonio Spurs from the NBA in the United States. His non-nonsense approach is fantastic, and he was one of the first ones to rely on international players as cornerstones of his franchise, and he always keep a lot of superstars happy and working together as a team. I always read a lot about him. Books and articles. I really appreciate his management style.
Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for now. And one thing that I find really interesting is when you start out with these kind of debates, you wonder how you're going to fill the time. But I feel that we could carry on talking. It's really interesting to get you guys in the room. I just want to finish by saying thank you to everybody for coming and supporting this event for international investment. It's our first leadership summit. We'd like to do more, and I hope that our readers and our viewers have enjoyed it just as much as I have. So thanks very much.